Hi, my name's Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, the 1983 film directed by Nagisa Oshima and starring David Bowie, Tom Conti, Ryuichi Sakamoto and Takeshi Kitano. I'd like to go through how this film is structured, as well as some of the themes that crop up. Now, if you could boil this film down to one sentence, it would be something like the effect and influence a charismatic leader has in a prisoner of war camp, both with his fellow prisoners and with the Japanese officers. And the film is in 3 acts, essentially, with a coda. Each of the 3 acts involve some kind of showdown between Jack Selliers, played by David Bowie, who is this charismatic major of the British Army who's imprisoned in his prisoner of war camp in Indonesia, and Captain Yonoi, who is in charge of this camp. Yonoi seems to have some fascination with Selliers, which perhaps spills over into some kind of homoerotic desire or fascination as well. Now, Act 1 is about Selliers being brought into this prisoner of war camp. And he's been tried at this court. He suffers a mock execution, and then he's taken to this camp where he is rather ill to begin with, and he's given time to recuperate in the prison hospital. In the meantime, there's another officer there, John Lawrence, who is he's fluent in Japanese, and he acts as a kind of intermediary between his fellow British soldiers and the Japanese guards and officers. And his influence is somewhat resented by Hixley, who is ostensibly in charge of the British soldiers. Now, Lawrence and Selliers, when they meet, they realise they've met already, and they start to develop a friendship. And while this is going on, there's this incident that's happened between a Korean prisoner and a Dutch prisoner. The Korean prisoner is said to have raped this Dutch soldier, and so in a rather barbaric way, the Korean guy, who seems to really have a relationship with this Dutch soldier, he's forced to commit harakiri, and a Dutch soldier bites his tongue and ends up dying as well. From this tragedy, the prisoners are made to fast, along with Captain Yonoi, as his tradition dictates, but Selliers decides that he's going to get some flowers to remember de Jong, the Dutch soldier who's died, as well as bring some food to the fellow prisoners, which of course he's not supposed to do. They're supposed to be fasting for 48 hours. And Selliers does this. They sing hymns for the dead Dutch soldier, and then Yonoi comes in and he realises what Selliers has been doing, and some of the Japanese soldiers suspect he's an evil spirit, and quite arrestingly, when Yonoi approaches Selliers and confronts him, Selliers simply starts eating the flowers, and then he's pulled away. Also, a radio has been found in amongst the British prisoners, and Lawrence is accused of hiding this. Both Lawrence and Selliers are taken to these cells, and that's the end of Act 1. Now, in Act 2, Selliers stands up to Captain Yonoi for a second and third time. We begin with Selliers and Lawrence in this cell, And a Japanese soldier tries to kill Celius because he believes he's leading the captain astray. But Celius manages to disarm the attacker, and he tries to free Lawrence, but then they run into Yonoi. Yonoi is spoiling for a fight with Celius, but Celius refuses to fight. He puts his sword down. That's the second confrontation. First time in Act 1 he gets some flowers in his face, this time he's laid down his sword. And Yonoi just doesn't get this at all. There's something about this Celius which fascinates him, yet deeply disturbs and challenges him as well. Then Lawrence and Celius are back in their cells. They share some past memories, some past regrets. Lawrence talks about a woman whom he met, and Celius talks about his brother, who he feels that he let down and betrayed. And we have these flashbacks to Celius' youth, where during school, Celius, who's always seen as this leader, who's the head boy in this public school, and he let his brother go through the humiliating ritual. And his brother, who was a singer, was forced to sing a song in this, and he never sang again. And Celius feels like he let his brother down, and he feels like he hasn't managed to make amends to him. Then it's Christmas, and Sergeant Harrer, who seems to have a rather warm and human side to him, despite also exhibiting some brutality on occasion. Drunk from sake, he decides to let Celius and Lawrence free from their prison, from their cells, which Yonoi is furious about initially when he finds out. Yonoi, in a rather bloody-minded way, makes all the prisoners come to parade in the ground, including those who are sick in the hospital. And as a result of this, one of the sick people dies. Hixley is outraged. He confronts Yonoi, and Yonoi is about to behead Hixley. But then Celius comes in. He steps in the way. He stops this execution happening, and he kisses Yonoi on both cheeks. And Yonoi seems to suffer some kind of collapse here. He falls to the ground. He just does not know how to take Celius. And that's the final confrontation. Act 3 is about the execution of Celius. Captain Yonoi has been stripped of his command. He's been replaced by this new captain who feels nothing for Celius. And Celius is buried up to his neck in the ground, left to die. And many of the prisoners are taken away with Sergeant Harrer to build an airstrip. But the remaining prisoners sing to Celius to try and keep his spirits up. And Celius thinks about his brother and how his brother is singing again. Yonoi then comes back and takes a lock of Celius' hair. We then fast forward a few years after the war, and Lawrence comes to visit Sergeant Harrer in prison on the eve of his execution. And they had a rather love-hate relationship, but there's a real warmth in this scene. They really do seem to have a close connection, these two characters. They reminisce about Celius' time when he arrived at Christmas time in Indonesia in that camp. And despite his execution the following day, Harrer turns round joyfully, and like he said before, he says, "Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence." And that's the end of the film. So what are we to make of Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence? There's a lot of interesting themes. The person of Jack Celius seems to be this rather Christ-like figure. He's one who sacrifices his life for others. So I guess there's a parallel with the cross. And of course we hear various Christian hymns in the film as well, sung by the soldiers, which perhaps emphasise this. There's also something Christ-like in the way Celius refuses to meet violence with violence, but with love. each of the three confrontations with Captain Yonoi are completely surprising and completely subvert Yonoi's cultural worldview. So when Yonoi approaches him after he fed the prisoners, Celliers just eats flowers. When Yonoi confronts him with his sword after Celliers escapes, Celliers just lays down his sword. Near the end of the film, the end of Act 2, when Celliers stops Hixley being executed and stands in his way, he simply kisses Yonoi on both cheeks. So it seems there's this theme of this eternal truth found through non-violence, which is encapsulated by Jack Celliers, and I think he's a kind of Christ figure in this film. The film talks a lot about leadership as well. Celliers is a born leader. He has this charisma about him, and people just seem to like him and want to follow him. Hixley wishes he was like that, but he isn't. He just hasn't got those qualities. There's also a lot about guilt and regret. Lawrence regrets aspects of his life, particularly this relationship with this woman. Yonoi regrets not being around during the Tokyo uprising, being with his compatriots. Celliers, of course, regrets his treatment of his brother. And Hara, at the end of the film, you can't help but feel that he regrets something of the actions he took on the eve of his execution. So regret and guilt form a part of this film, being haunted by the past. There's this clash of cultures in this film as well, between kind of British values and the religion and culture of Japan. And there's also something of a homoerotic charge in this film as well, particularly between Celliers and Yonoi. Yonoi seems infatuated with Celliers, but there's also a rather more derogatory feeling towards same-sex attraction in this film as well, particularly with some of the homophobic talk of Sergeant Hara near the beginning of the film, and occasionally by some of the other British soldiers as well. There's a lot about, of course, brutality in these camps, as well as a lot about execution, imprisonment, as you'd expect. So, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. You know, a very thought-provoking film, and, you know, I do recommend this film. It's a film worthy of a great deal of thought. It's worth watching a couple of times as well, I think. And David Bowie's great in it, you know. Initially I thought, well, is he a bit wooden, or is he, you know, but I think he's actually, he kind of gets this kind of otherworldly, as you'd expect, this otherworldly quality of Celliers across. And Tom Conti is absolutely fantastic in this. He just exudes this warmth and this charm, and he's such a likeable character, Lawrence. And Tom Conti, I think, plays him brilliantly. And Sakamoto is perhaps a bit wooden, but he's certainly a striking visual presence. And Takeshi Kitano provides a very affecting performance in this film. Please check out the slideshow afterwards with the structure and the themes. Thank you for watching. Bye.